No, they ain't got no questions. Our next, our next presenter, Mr. Cardale Oren, Director of Stand for the Children. Do it the way you want to do it.
Thank you. I'll stay here if that's okay. Ms. Huffman, Ms. Sweetlove, distinguished panel, thank you for having me here. I thank everybody who's here. I come wearing a few hats. One is, yes, City Director of Stand for Children, and so representing all the parents who I know are important and at both our traditional and our charter schools who care about their kids. I also come as the board chair for Freedom Prep Academy, one of our great charter schools here, representing CEO Roblin Webb back here. And as a former public school student from Memphis City Schools and a Memphian who's been a few places and had a history of growing up with advocates in my family. I think my mom is back there. There she is. Even though we don't agree sometimes on these issues, but y'all can talk to her. Anyway, where is this? So one, I am so glad to hear so many people say we support public schools, traditional or charter. I think that should be for all of our kids. As we think about the history of public schools in Memphis, especially in Shelby County as a whole, what we can see that we have 170 years of public schools in Memphis, 150 years of black kids being educated in Memphis. A little bit less for Shelby County, about 130, 140 years of education as Shelby County schools. And then about 100 years later, going from 1871 when Shelby County Schools was founded to 1973 when we saw desegregation and busing kick in, it's important to understand from the segregation standpoint that we've taken up and questions that have come, that during busing we had 40,000 white kids in 4 years leave the Memphis City school system because of busing. We had one of our former presenters here lead an effort to institutionalize segregation of legacy Shelby County schools and parceling those out. We had the merging of Shelby County schools, legacy Shelby County schools, and legacy Memphis City schools, only to see the re-separation of those schools into municipal school districts that serve the suburban kids. And so we need to understand that there is a history of localizing, quote unquote, of choice in our community, and that it needs to be in the right context. Our parents, we know, support quality schools. So all of this, as other presenters have said, as the superintendent said, as board member Jones said, should be about supporting quality schools. We know our parents, who I'm sure are here, support quality schools, and they want to make the best choices and have the right options for their kids to get a quality education. I know that many of the parents that I serve at Stand for Children have kids in multiple places. They do what's best for their kids. Some have kids in traditional schools, some choose charters, some choose private, and they might have one child in each of those options because that's the best choice for their kid. What we need to be sure, and I think some other people have said it, is that we have the transparency of how schools are doing so that people can make the right choices for their kids, the transparency of how schools are doing, and of the opportunities that kids get at those schools. We know our Shelby County Schools has a clear Destination 2025, and so we know that they support quality schools. One of their priorities, priority 4, is expanding high-quality school options, and that's clearly, I think, a place where charter schools are playing a role, and not the sole role, but playing a role in delivering quality education the same way that Shelby County Schools is improving the education that it delivers in its traditional schools, through our iZone schools, through our optional schools, and through improving all of those schools that are in the middle. As we look at the accountability, and so one of the things that I wanted to do was to provide some local Memphis context to what we have going on. I know it's hard to read, but the main thing to see is that the dotted line across, and this comes from Shelby County Schools' 2015 charter school report, that the dotted line across is the district average. Those little yellow dots that you see in the middle are the regional school, are the schools in the region for those schools, and all of those bars are charter schools. So that we can see that a majority of our schools are performing as well or better than the schools in their region. That's not to say that makes a difference, but it means to say that charter schools are performing. It's also to say that we have a lot on the bottom end of that. And some of this, and this is from 2015, so this doesn't include, you can chop off about 4 at the bottom of that the district closed. And so we do need to hold our schools accountable. We know that we are getting better and better as a state, as a country, at accountability. We know that several years ago when Dr. Johnson was at Legacy Memphis City Schools and Mr. Pickle was at Legacy Shelby County Schools, that our state was complicit in not being true about how schools were doing because they graded on a curve. So Memphis City Schools would get an F, Legacy Shelby County Schools would get an A, and they were about 15 or 20 points apart, and none of us were serving our kids well, and we were parceling the kids over, and Legacy Shelby County Schools was hiding under an A when they had kids being not serviced, especially in Millington and Southeast Shelby County. So we know that we need to have better accountability, and I think that it's important. Somebody brought up ESSA earlier. I think that it's important to look at that, and Malika Anderson talked a little bit about some of the process for how they derive the priority schools. It's important for everybody to be involved in the decisions that the state is making. So as we start to look at this, that we make sure, Mr. Johnson, that we are looking at both, not just proficiency, but both proficiency and growth, because those are the ways that we know whether our children are being served at the schools, how they need to be served. And that we can get better accountability and balance so that we know that even schools that are achieving highly and that are highly proficient still need to be growing their kids. And if they're not growing their kids, there needs to be an intervention and something done to make sure that they do. As we think about how our charter schools, do they serve all students? Again, this is data that comes from the report. At the top, you'll see, do I have a pointer on it? Maybe, yep. At the top, you'll see that this is the number of economically disadvantaged kids that are enrolled in charter schools versus traditional Shelby County schools. So you'll see there are only a couple of percentage points apart, not even percentage points, tenths of a percentage point apart in terms of the number of economically disadvantaged kids that they're serving. You'll see a larger disparity, but still not a huge disparity in the number of special needs kids who are being served, with 12% being served but in traditional schools versus the almost 9% being served at the charter schools. And then as we think about suspension rate...
What's the orange and the green so we can...
I'm sorry, the orange is the traditional schools, the Shelby County schools, traditional schools, and the green is the charter schools. And then, so if you look at the suspension rates, as I think somebody mentioned before, there are lessons to be learned here. So we see that the charter schools have lower suspension rates. I will, truth in advertising, say that there are some of those kids who are being counseled out. So the suspension rates may not be completely honest in terms of charter schools. So there is some balance that needs to be done based on that, and some accountability and transparency needs to be held for that. But we can see that there isn't a huge disparity in what we see, at least in what's being reported. And again, if they're not reporting true numbers, we need to hold them accountable and compliant on that. So about education funding in Tennessee, one thing that we all need to talk about, I think Board Member Jones mentioned this, is that it's not a battle. It shouldn't be a competition. In Tennessee, we don't fund schools enough. We are 44th in funding out of 50 states, and I think that 44th is tied with a few states. So it's not there. The estimate, as somebody mentioned earlier about education funding, if we followed BEP 2.0, which was passed, I don't know, Ms. Sweetlove, 10, 15, 20 years ago, when they passed that funding mechanism, that funding formula, if they applied full BEP 2.0, Shelby County schools as a whole, charter schools, traditional schools, everybody, would get an estimated $100 million extra. And so this is not a battle of charter versus traditional. This is a battle for adequate funding for our kids overall. As it relates to the specific resolution of the NAACP about the impact of funding, there have been studies about what that is. The studies have not come out to any final conclusion. I think last I read 2015, Nashville has done 5 studies. The Tennessee Comptroller recently, last year, came out with a report that said there's not enough information to decide whether charter schools are getting too little or too much money to be able to see, and that further study is needed. And so I think that one of the things that we do know is that we want equitable funding across the board. You can see here that the Comptroller concluded that there's insufficient clarity, transparency, and verification in how districts fund charter schools. And so again, this is something where we need to hold them accountable, and we need to have districts and charter schools work together to make sure that we all accomplish the goal that I think we all want to see, which is equitable and adequate funding for all of our kids to receive a quality education. I think, as I'll talk about in a minute, and as Board Member Jones mentioned, we've had charter schools in the district working together in a committee here in Shelby, under Shelby County Schools, and I think under that we've seen that many of the charter school leaders agree that if we have overhead costs that are applied or that the district has to take care of, that there should be some cost sharing in that. You want transparency, you want documentation of it, and you want to make sure that the money gets applied to being a quality authorizer. But I think people agree that you can share in those costs. And then also, one solution that I know the district is looking at, and Nashville has already done, is moving to student-based funding, which one will allow districts, and I think Dr. Johnson kind of mentioned that as you think about the weighting of funding that goes to particular schools and students based on the need, and also I think that would allow the district and schools to better adjust to our changing enrollment levels. Looking at local solutions, again, looking at the Charter Advisory Committee that Shelby County Schools Board, along with the superintendent, instituted, that they have come together to increase the partnership between district and charter schools, addressing issues of accountability, oversight, and transparency, and making sure there's a commitment to equitable funding for all students. Again, this is a place where we can see that we have a local solution of coming together, finding ways that we can partner to get to the goal that I think we all have